Hi, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today with the Clinician Engineer Hub, bridging the gap between medicine and engineering. Now, I'm very honored to have Sarah Mardle here today, who is a business consultant and leadership coach here in Cambridge. And one of the things that we find when we're working across different teams, particularly medicine and engineering, is that there can be potentially some difference of opinion, different insights, different viewpoints. So how do we actually narrow those differences and allow that collaboration to become much more smooth and free flowing? And so, Sarah, I know you have significant expertise working across teams and allowing teams from different backgrounds and different mindsets to come together and work in a more collaborative fashion. So it's great to have you here. I appreciate how busy you
Thanks,
are and
Neil.
how much work that you have to do. So over to you. Excited to have you here today.
No, thank you very much for the invitation, Neil. It is a real passion of mine to support businesses in growing and the people in the businesses to be growing as well, which is why I sort of bridge the two things. So both the business consultancy, where I'm helping these businesses with practical solutions, but also I completely, to your point, recognize that often various functions that might not work so efficiently. And people might need some support, and this is where I come in as well as a qualified coach, because I can support these teams both at a team level, but also maybe on a one-to-one level, because sometimes people need some support in developing those leadership skills as well.
Perfect. So obviously you have the expertise in this field. What do you think are often some of the challenges that you see when teams are trying to come together and work to basically create a solution to a particular problem? So I can give you an example. Medics will often see a clinical issue and they may rely on engineers to help with the problem solution. And engineers may not have the exact clinical background or experience, and so they may interpret the problem in a different way. And sometimes you can see not necessarily friction, but difference of an agreement. What would you advise if you're leading such a team, and obviously you're trying to focus on the end product? What kind of hints and tips that you can offer teams that maybe, you know, not necessarily antagonistic, but just looking at
Yeah.
things in a different way?
Yeah, you're unpacking a lot there because I think there's different elements. And one of the key ones is obviously the communication. So listening to what your counterparts might be saying and understanding it, because you're bringing, a diverse range of experiences and different perspectives, which is really great because that's the outcome you want. You want something that is going to be a holistic view to support the problem, the patient, the product that you're all trying to work towards. But often people find that it's really difficult to put that viewpoint across, and that those communication skills are really important to develop in order to bring across your perspective, but also understand what the perspective of the other person might be. So I'm not an engineer, I'm a scientist. And for many years, I've worked alongside R&D scientists. And I think being able to then put myself in their shoes and understanding their perspective is really important, because when I come in from a business perspective, maybe from a compliance side of things, or maybe from um, a business strategy perspective, I can understand where they're coming from. So it's really, for me, quite important to step back and think, how can I relate to this person? How can I translate what I'm trying to say in their language, in their mindset, in their viewpoint? So trying to put yourself in that person's shoes, because your communication, you can't change people. You have to adapt your communication to them. So if you are talking to engineers and scientists, use that language because they'll feel really comfortable with them. If you're talking to people who are really detailed and you know that because you've worked with them, then make sure that you go towards that and give them a detailed perspective, because they're going to go, oh, yeah, Sarah gets me. She understands how I like to work. But if you're talking to a business leader who may communicate to you and bring you maybe a communication which is really to the point and very bullet points, what can you do to reach out to them? If they're emailing to you, email back and do bullet points. So things like that, you then start
Makes sense.
to adapt yourself to others, and therefore they will really understand you're on their side. So that's the first point. I would say the second one is, what's your common goal? And sometimes we forget that we're all in this together. But what does that mean? And repeating ourselves and realigning can be really powerful. Because especially when you're having conflict or friction or difficulties, both technical difficulties, but also communication difficulties, it can be easy to take it quite personally and start losing that big picture that at the end of the day, everyone gets out of bed in the morning because they want to do great work. They're not there to mess up your work or upset you or have conflict. So what, what does that look like as a team? Because everyone goes, well, you work with patients, health, but actually in the day to day, maybe you kind of distance yourself a little bit from that. And that really tense meeting, it was all about the technical stuff. And if you step away and then start going, guys, actually, what's our common purpose? How are we going to resolve that? Because if you start with something that aligns yourself, then you can start breaking down okay, how are we going to get there? What are we going to do about it, guys and gals? Does that
No,
make sense?
yeah, no, absolutely. I think there's a lot of interesting themes there, and I can probably relate to it. There was one theme that I liked in particular. I'm just trying to reflect on myself as an individual. You certainly said that everyone's different, and that's true. And I think one of my deficiencies, although I personally have a bias, I think it's a positive, but people point out, it can be a negative, is that I'm more abstract in my thinking. So whether that's sort of to do with the growth mindset type of approach that I have, or sort of blue sky thinking, this is who I am. I've been this way for now 42 years. So then when I'm put in a team where people are a bit more detail orientated, a bit more sort of, well, I wouldn't say fixed mindset, but you could say that way. I feel tension in myself because in my mind I'm like, oh well, this is the idea and it's great and let's just get it done. And I probably don't focus on the details.
Mm.
And I think detail orientated people are like, well, it doesn't kind of work that way. So I do see that play out all the time. And I think, you raise a good point that sometimes when it gets tense, it's take a break and focus on what we're actually aiming to do here and realize, maybe sort of that timeout actually helps things move forward. So
Yeah,
communication is crucial.
yeah.
To that point, then, would you say that sometimes in meetings, obviously the focus here is clinician and engineering related, would you bring in someone that isn't necessarily a clinician or an engineer to then view it as a sort of outside based approach and say, you know what, guys and girls, like you say, we're kind of collapsing in communication now.
Yeah.
Why don't we try, X, Y, or Z? Do you think I've not seen that? So in the NHS setting, at least, I've not really seen a sort of outsider type influence just sitting on meetings. And I was just actually thinking, you raise a good point. Is that something that we should actually be doing? Um,
Certainly someone with facilitation type of perspective is really valuable. But there's no reason why someone can't be brought into the team that has that sort of role. So I just said I'm a scientist. I'm not a very proficient IT expert, but I have managed IT teams. And I have been responsible for the IT function in my previous organization, for example. And there, when I was coming and asked to join a particular meeting where I could support, was more because I had those skills and I had a vested interest. Back to our first point is, getting a really good outcome. And I didn't need to particularly understand every single little element of the technical aspect of that critical meeting, but what I could bring was that viewpoint, that challenge. And I still, I wanted to make sure that the teams had a really good outcome. But I could ask the dumb questions, or I could, facilitate and pull out maybe people who are a little bit more quiet in the room, more reflective, and make sure their views were coming across. I could come in with challenging questions because sometimes finding allies in your organization who can come in with that different perspective, but also that sort of facilitator role can be really helpful. And that's kind of, we were saying I'm a coach, and often that's what I come in is not just looking at a business process or implementing a particular project or advising, but I come in and sort of support the teams as well, go through that process, and have these conversations and moderate, facilitate, and support.
No, that's really good. And I think, like you said, your background is in science, not necessarily related to, computer engineering, but that's what you're trying to do is still reach the point where the product is developed, maybe hardware or software, and you do that through the facilitation and enhanced communication. And clearly, if the communication breaks down, you'll never reach the end stage of the product, right? So it makes perfect sense. I think also what's interesting, and I kind of have this issue. So on the whole scale of introversion, extroversion, I'm more of a reflective person. I like in meetings to listen to what everyone's saying, and then probably raise a point. And sometimes when I do that, maybe I'm getting spoken over, and then it kind of has an effect where I think, okay, maybe I won't say anything. Um, how do you draw out the more reflective type of people? Because I was thinking if you were to, I'm not saying you do this, I'm just, reflecting on this call right now.
Yeah.
If you were to say, oh, so and so, maybe you've not said something, would you like to contribute? Would that make it worse? Like how do you get them involved? What any tricks?
So I think, yeah, it is absolutely fine to have reflective types. Actually, I believe in diverse teams. So having a mixture of people who will be very gut feelings, very open, and the brain engages really quickly with lots of answers, lots of questions within the meeting is really valuable. And it's equally valuable, and we should celebrate the fact that we also bring colleagues, and I'm one of those individuals too, who are more of a reflective type. And when I do think of something, it tends to bring a different perspective, a different angle that other colleagues may not have found. And I think being comfortable with that and seeing the value you bring to your organization is the first thing, and not thinking, oh, I must be speaking up at meetings all the time. No, are you comfortable? Are you bringing value to the meeting? Are you bringing value to the organization? And respecting, your strengths is really important, I think. But I think there's also an opportunity for people who are in meetings and facilitating to bring that space for those more effective types, and to recognize that the format that you will get the best out of that person might not be just in the moment. And their presence is still important as a representative, and they're taking it in, they are reflecting, and giving them either the space at the end, of a session, or a particular agenda point to say, okay, we've now really threshed it out. I'd really like to actually, just thinking about what we've just said, I'd really like to hear what Neil's got to say, but also giving permission to say, Neil, I know that we are unpicking a lot. Um, Tomorrow, can we catch up? And actually, I'd really like to hear if you've got any further thoughts. That gives you permission and gives you the space for you to give that overnight thinking that you may need, and gives me the opportunity to get the best out of you. Now, it might be that you're too busy the next morning, and then it's up to you to go, you know what, I'll drop you an email if I have any further thoughts. So it's finding that comfort between different people to give them that opportunity to contribute, as and when they feel best, and give the best of themselves, really.
No, that makes sense. And actually, you touch upon something that I do myself. So in the moment, it's kind of okay, I'm absorbing all these different sources and perspectives. And actually, yeah, I do need a few days for the mind just to settle, to
Yeah,
think about it, and then yeah, email in my thoughts. So I actually do that, which is interesting.
yeah,
Um, and I often wonder, like, have I been slow to respond? But it just takes me time to process it, and maybe I overthink. Um, and that also could be a bit of a negative. I was actually going to ask you another point, if I may. So you mentioned that people are people, and you know their sort of psychology and background is what it is. And then we see a lot actually in today's society about trying to be influential and trying to sort of have an influence over people and maybe persuade them that way. How do you find that works in teams? Do you think that's an approach, or should we just embrace them as they are and then just mainly focus on acceptance that way as opposed to trying to change people? Because I
yeah.
see a lot of this kind of influential concept, and I wonder where we're going with this generally.
Yeah, I think there's different aspects. There's influencing and there's coercing and the negative side of making it an unhealthy transaction. Whereas I do think there's a space where influencing and positively influencing is a massive bonus. One of the reasons why I speak out and speak up at different conferences or different speaking events is a way for me to indirectly influence other women who might be considering, leadership roles. And one of my passions is to be supporting them and by positively influencing them, saying, if I can do this, you can too. I'm hopefully influencing, maybe some of their decisions and thinking, yeah, actually, I do want to be doing more of these things. I do want to be at exec level or at board level. So for me, influencing can be an incredibly positive thing because it's role modeling, it's supporting people. I find that sometimes influencing can be giving positive reinforcement to people who don't have that self-belief they can do it, and actually spelling it out, saying, I believe in you. I think you're going to smash it at that next talk, at that conference, is influencing because you're giving those words, the person is hearing them, and it might just be what they needed to hear to feel, yeah, I've got this. I can totally go into that conference and do that talk. So
Yeah.
I think there's some really wonderful ways of supporting people in influencing them without it being a negative uh,
Hmm.
perception, if that makes sense.
No, definitely. Yeah, I think I'd probably wrongly interpreted the concept of influencing. It's more of a motivating aspect. And probably for those that are feeling a bit shaky on their feet before they give I don't know, a presentation at a board meeting or in a public arena, it's kind of saying, like you say, you can actually do this. So, you have faith in a way.
Absolutely.
So
It's
moving
also,
forward with that, yeah.
yeah, it's giving opportunities as well to people. So you can influence someone's career path by giving them opportunities, by delegating things to them. Because that's how the opportunities will arise to them to grow. And by you saying, I believe you can totally do this job for me, I trust you, you're going to do it. And the person being able to say, I'm a bit nervous about that. And you reflecting back saying, yeah, it's probably going to be tough, but I'm sure that you'll learn from it. We can debrief afterwards, but if I'm putting you in this position, is I believe that you're capable of doing it. You're giving that person the opportunity then to be, growing and developing. And there's an important difference between stretching and stressing. And it's just finding that right sweet spot where you are challenging people just as they want to be and being stretched and having opportunities for learning. And again, that's influencing them because they might go into things that they wouldn't otherwise dare to do. but you see the potential.
Oh, fantastic. I mean, this is all very motivating. And absolutely, I think across the spectrum of clinicians and engineers, I think we need you on board here, sir. So very very useful advice, and it's all about, like you say, communication, making sure that there's clarity of communication, understanding the mindset of people, and people they think and process information in different ways, different speeds, and having an outside perspective when meetings take place. Actually, I think there's something certainly we can introduce. And if you're looking at the clinician engineering element, maybe the engineer is focusing too much on the actual device and sort of maybe not quite fully understanding the clinical issue, and the clinician is focusing on the clinical issue, and maybe their view of the device is totally at odds, i.e. they have a grand plan, but maybe it's not doable at this time. So yeah, that's it's very 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 valuable information. Any final points from yourself, or
I guess
motivational tips there, Sarah?
I would share one because it's come across quite a few times when I've been coaching some of my clients, because it's in a business context, and they may find, to your original point, that they are finding conflict, they are finding friction, they are frustrated that they are not coming across. They feel their communication has adapted. They feel they have reached out to the person, and yet something is still not quite working. And that's where um, I come in, when I try and support and provide, coaching to help them work that way through. And one of the things that I've realized, and I've been a coach for 10 years, and it's been really, really helpful for me to remember that effectively when people show up at work, you don't know what's happened at home. You don't know what their life is going on. You don't know how full their batteries are, and you don't know what I call their capacity is. And you may make an assumption that they are being a bit stubborn. They are not listening to you. They are not communicating effectively. But if you distance yourself and you think you just don't know, so frame it that that person, that might be the maximum they could give to you that day. And therefore I find it really helpful because then it becomes not personal. So you may have gone towards it, you may have worked, to improve the communication with them, and yet there's still more work to be done. And by accepting that the person's level of capacity is X and no more, enables you to take away some of that, that disappointment or that maybe that anger that you may feel towards them, because you start thinking, that's all you could get for me today, and I respect that. That doesn't mean you let it go, and that doesn't mean that you ignore the problem. But by you stepping away from that situation and thinking, I need to be completely professional and also need to understand that's as much as they can get today. It helps you manage yourself, and it helps you, I think, hopefully demonstrate a bit of maybe some compassion, some empathy that you may need to give to that person, and who has 100% capacity all the time? Nobody. So
Definitely.
that really helps me in sort of giving some perspective into those difficult situations.
I think that was really lovely, actually. I think, so you touched upon something that we assume that if we're going into the workplace, we have to be on all the time, but actually we have personal lives. We have situations that are happening in the background, and we kind of get told not to bring that to the workplace, but actually sometimes it's just inevitable that it does happen.
Yeah,
And then we may misinterpret, lack of engagement on a particular day as disinterest, or sort of, not performing in an efficient way, but actually there could be clearly multiple reasons. And
yeah,
like you say, it's not that people are, they shouldn't be transparent with personal matters as well, because that's a sensitive issue. So it's also being
yeah.
kind of
And
threat.
it might have been even in the workplace. It might have been the previous meeting they had
Yeah.
was really, really tough. And some people put across some words that really, hurt their feelings. Um, the deliverables weren't met. They feel responsible for it. All these things in the workplace as well may be impacting how you show up at the next encounter you have with a colleague.
No, absolutely. Yeah, no, and it can make the work environment quite tense, right? So, yeah, something to certainly bear in mind. Well, fantastic. Thanks so much, Sarah. It's really, really impressive. Certainly, all these hints and tips is going to make the clinician engineering process smoother. And we'll absolutely, take on board all the advice that you've offered there. So, for anyone listening today, reach out to Sarah on LinkedIn. I'm sure she's more than happy to be consulted.
Absolutely.
And thanks so much once again, Sarah. Thank you so much.
Cheers. Bye.
Take care. Bye bye.